Okay, hi everybody. So this is a two-part presentation. The first part is going to talk about essentially my experiences in taking data from relational database systems to graph, specifically to linked open data. So my part will talk about the experience on how we did it for a particular industry, specifically cultural heritage sector. And the second part will be by today. He will talk about how the application of ontologies can be used in Swarm and DataFund. So just a quick background. So I've been in this space for about 14 years, specifically with ArtStore, Ithaca, and the Mellon Foundation. I started off with CDWL Lite schema. This is a schema which describes how to describe a work of art. So the problem was that we have museums all around the world, and they all have heterogeneous data sources and different systems. So the goal was to create, with the help of Getty research, define one schema, one ring to rule them all, and using their money, go around the world and install software and harvesting software and harvest all that data into one global repository. So we started off with the Metropolitan Museum. We converted them to this standard, and that was our initial trial. After that, I think some people from Germany, Museum DAT specifically, they liked our model, and they took the leadership after that, and decided to change the project, and it was called Lido, which then again continued to work with Getty to go around the world implementing standards for museums, so you have universal access. So the problem back in those days were there were no systems to catalog art history. So the idea of shared shelf, which is a concept of allowing to catalog images and media for academic institutions, came into play. So we took that proposal and we gave it to the Mellon Foundation, and they accepted it, and we ended up creating shared shelf. Shared shelf, I mean, this is still all background for the talk I'm going to talk about. So shared shelf is a platform which allows you to catalog objects of art using not only standard text, but you have vocabularies, specifically vocabularies which are provided by Getty. These are thesauri, relating to artists and works and places and concepts. I'll talk about that in a bit more detail later on. So we started this with about 7 big institutions, academic institutions. And right now there are about, I think it's 180. Yeah, about 180 institutions across the world now utilize shared shelf. So just to give you an example, this is a record of Abraham Lincoln. In shared shelf, you can see you have titles, variant titles, different languages. You have the creator who actually made the sculpture. Again, this is your authority, your linked authority. The linked authority in this sense means that the data is curated and comes from, it's all referenced by scholars. So it's the authority. So similarly, so this schema goes down, which contains a bunch of authority records, and people utilize this to catalog. So while we were doing that, we were working with Columbia University, and they had another project in mind, which was Built Works Registry. Now, Built Works, they claim to be the biggest curated data source for built environment. So they comprised of about 42 different source collections around the world. They pick, I think, strategic partners from India to Italy to America. So we had a very diverse set, specifically relating to built environment. So using that project, we thought, okay, we will use this project as a guinea pig to expose the data in the linked open data environment. So a quick review on how we started this project. With our partner institutions, we converted the data into a format, ingested it into shared shelf. The BWR staff links it to various authorities, and then finally they push it out to the public, who can then utilize that record. Again, this is all for scholarly purposes. And the typical example here being, so either an institution could contribute data or an individual user could contribute data. So an example here is like someone who's researching Mayan temples. They find a particular image that hasn't been cataloged. They upload it to the to the local layer. The editorial board reviews it and finally approves and publishes the data in the community space, which then can be utilized by people like Liz, who's a high school student doing research on Mayan temples. So this is just a workflow of an individual versus an institution on how data is contributed to this method. So yes, all of this is just a setup for linked open data. What is this? Well, it's a cluster of data, which the goal here is to make data openly available in a particular format and to provide links among various data. So it becomes machine readable. As of a few weeks ago, there were about 1,200 data sets. It started off in 2008 with like a few hundred. When we were doing it, it was like around 500 to 750, and now it's about 1,200. So how do you actually enter this linked open data club? I mean, this is kind of very basic things. Well, you need to use URIs to define objects. When you look up those objects, you need to provide data in a particular format, specifically RDF here. And finally, you have to link your data to other people's data. So discoverability goes up. So these are the 4 principles that you have to follow. So how do we join it? Well, going back to what I showed you before, Shared Shelf was our main platform. So we created an ontology on Shared Shelf, and then we mapped that ontology to our data schema, and then we exposed our data through a semantic portal, essentially endpoints, to access that data, and then you register the data set. You register your endpoint URL, and then you also provide your entire data dump to the Data Hub IO. Linking. Well, we have to obviously link this to make it work, right? So we have to identify who do we link to. Getty vocabularies here obviously is the #1 choice because they're not only funding the project, but it's an extensive vocabulary used in art history for naming for geographic places, and other links like GeoNames and DBpedia. And how do we match them? Well, this also happened in phases. The first part was quite simple because we had the ID of the record, so it's creating a very simple triple with taking that ID and saying is the same as this ID. So once you have generated the link between one entity to another, you then provide those links to the ontology owners on the other side. So they can also ingest that data on their side and they can reference back to you. This is a quick review of what the XSD is. So over here in the middle, we have a work record. Again, this is how they catalog objects of art. So this is your container model, and this is your display record. The example here being if you have like a shot cathedral or Eiffel Tower, that would be your work, and then the various views of that building or object will be your display record. So this is fixed. This is somewhat flexible, meaning we allow you to model it any way you want. So in this scenario, there's a part-whole relationship between these two. So this is our starting point, essentially, right? So we have this is your relational system. We have our data in this format. How do we convert it to go into LOD? Well, there's a transformation process between this XSD that I showed you into an ontology, right, which is a shared shelf ontology, which we are going to use. Once we have that conversion, we can generate instances based on data. This is just some examples on how we actually converted the XSD to its counterpart in the ontologies. I'm just going to fly through that. And that's an example ontology of the same XSD that I showed you before, right here. So it's a different view of it. And this is your display record. So again, the concept of work record and display record is key to understanding these components. So an actual live example. So this is your shared shelf system, a display record, kind of very flat, as you can see. You publish this, there's an ID right there. You publish to the website. The website is using an Omeka plugin, essentially, so it's all automated. And then it publishes into this website. You can obviously visit this, it's all open. And once you click on the semantic view, that's where you see that data in its RDF format. And from here, we can actually visualize it. So you can see the project is BuiltWorks registry. It contains Wall Street building, which is linked to New York record. And then from New York, you can see other records which are linked to New York. And then going over to the Getty vocabulary, you can then actually navigate the thesaurus using broader terms and narrower terms. You can go up to New York County, or you can go down to Brooklyn. That's, again, it's a classic way of mapping to a thesaurus and then using the thesaurus to discover data in your own data set. This is just a quick overview of again, all the various components happening with Shared Shelf. So, I mean, it's a fairly large project. About 100 people worked on it over the course of 10 years, and there are various tools which came into play. And this is the one section that we are talking about today. So this allows you to export data into a linked open data environment. So over the course of a year, we did about 8 releases. We tried to do 1 release a month, but it didn't really work out that way. But it was essentially taking baby steps, you know, starting something very small, starting with a simple flat data set, which is a display record, and pointing to a local instance of a vocabulary. And then ending the year with full-blown shared shelf support. What does that mean? That means now any type of vocabulary that you connect to, when you publish your data actually goes into the linked open data space with links to all the different cloud sets. And one final point I want to make here is we also allowed the project itself to become a vocabulary. So that means you could catalog, and then you wanted to, if you have, I don't know, a list of temples, that temple could be the temple vocabulary, which could then be opened and used by other people. I'm going to talk briefly about data enrichment, just how that process works. So imagine you have very simple Eiffel Tower text as a title, location as Paris. You bring this you take an export of this and import it into LOD Refine. LOD Refine is a project which allows you to work with messy data and also has links to various vocabularies in the LOD space. So we take that data and we define a particular data source. In this case was DBpedia and the thesaurus for geographic names. Once you reconcile, you can see it picks up a match to that resource, and then we go back to that resource and get additional information. So once you've made the link to Paris in TGN, we can get all the variant names. Well, actually, sorry, that's the wrong one. Once you've made the link to Eiffel Tower, you can get all the variant names from Eiffel Tower. I mean, this is just one example. And once you've got all the variant names, you can upload that data back into Shared Shelf. So that allows, this is the use case of using linked open data, is to be able to search your own data with other people's information. And this is just one last diagram which talks about how we actually make our project as a controlled vocabulary. Essentially, what it comes down to is every single project can be deployed in this environment and ends up with an endpoint. So then you can share this endpoint with anybody who wants to reference your project, and that's it.